I acknowledge that I am hosting and recording this meeting and webinar from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting and webinar. Well, good morning, everyone, and good morning to those, oh God, you're all looking over there. Good morning to everyone online, and good morning to everyone here in person. So on behalf of the NFP Strategic Alliance, the HLB Mann, Judd and the Commonwealth Bank, I welcome our guests here today to our NFP Not-for-Profit Leaders Report on Strategic Planning. This morning, the Not-for-Profit Specialist team will deliver the findings and results of our Not-for-Profit Leaders Survey on Strategic Planning for 2023. And I would like to personally thank all of those that participated in the survey. We are very fortunate also today to have guest speakers, Fehon and Darren Hopkins from McGrathNicol, who will provide insights into cyber issues and how it can be managed. A little bit about our guest speakers. So Matt is a highly regarded corporate advisory specialist and forensic expert who specialises in financial crime, corporate corruption and regulatory investigations, dispute advisory, enforceable undertakings and risk advisory. And Darren is a highly respected qualified investigator and forensic technologist expert with more than 20 years of specialist forensic experience and more than 5 years as a foundation member of the Forensic Computer Examination Unit with the Queensland Police. Held in high regard by attorneys in the courts, he has undertaken complex forensic examinations for both criminal and civil litigation in Australia and overseas. I would also like to introduce Aidan Smith, who is our Head of Not-for-Profits Australasia, and our two other partners that will be presenting today is Fiona Dixon, who is our Business Transformation Automation, and then we have Todd Gammel, who's the Head of Restructuring and Risk. So I'd like to now hand it over to Aidan.
All right, so I'm here to talk about the key findings, some of the key findings from our report. It's quite a lot of findings, so I'm just going to summarise some of the key ones for you this morning. So the first one this year, if you achieve your strategic plan, what will happen to your revenue? So what we found that 70% said it will either maintain or increase, with the majority actually come out and say that it's going to increase. Now, there are many challenges that are going to be faced trying to achieve that. I'm going to talk about those later in this presentation. This is also interesting because what we found when we asked people what the two top barriers to achieving the strategic plan were, we're told that staffing issues, 69% of people said that staffing issues were a major challenge, and 65% said the economic environment, the current economic or the forecast economic environment, were also challenges. Now, those are pretty big percentages. You look at that now. If we move on to this slide, what we ask is, have you seen an increase or decrease in the need requests for your organisation's core services in the last 12 months? So perhaps not surprising to many in the room and online is that 68% of people saw an increase. 8% saw a decrease and 24% saw no change at all. And then following on from that is who anticipates an increase in services. So what we've asked historically, the last 12 months, 84% see expect an increase. Now, we talked a minute ago about people seeing that the forecasting strategic plan is essential, and if they do get that, they will get the increased revenue. The question is, if you don't achieve your strategic plan, how are you going to fund this? If you've got increased services, you're expecting, you've already had increased demand, and you're expecting increased demand, how are we going to fund this? Now, with all the current economic uncertainty, with the labour shortages in the market, and some uncertainty over the funding, I mean, there's lots of challenges trying to meet the strategic plan, and it's about a perfect storm that we are in just now. I mean, I think a lot of this is probably no surprise to many of you in the room, but it confirms what people are thinking out there. When we asked this survey, we had over 100 people respond to the survey from a wide range of not-for-profits, from smaller ones to larger ones as well, across a wide range of sectors as well. We had with charities, health and disability providers, we had schools, we had membership organisations, clubs, we had a whole wide range of them. So this is across the board that people seeing this as a challenge. Now, next section we talk about is the people and culture. And we asked people regarding, first of all, we asked people regarding staff turnover. And we found that there's got 38% had between 11, 12, 20%, 60%, 21, 30%, and 37% less than 20%. So there's a lot, there has been a lot of staff turnover. Now, the question is how do we replace that? And that's what this slide here is showing. So we had, they were looking to fill those staffing holes gaps. And 62% said they're looking recruiting like for like. And that's a challenge in itself. Number one is finding the people who you're going to replace the ones coming in. Number two is the cost of that. So it's the cost of recruiting the people, and it's the cost of training them up as well. So there's stats out there at how much actually costs. You've got the salary, you've got on costs, but you've also got the training costs on top of that. How long it takes to actually train somebody up. So I mean that's really it's a real challenge. We also asked, and it's in contractors as well, it's similar with contractors. It takes time to onboard someone, to train someone up into the way that you do things. Now, the interesting one we've got is automation, which Fiona is going to talk about later on. 27%. Fiona will talk about the advantages that can be had from that. But we asked for the number one challenge. We're told it's remuneration. So remuneration is the number one challenge for not-for-profits. And that's instead an expensive thing. Remuneration can be costly. Now, when we're talking about the automation, there are some good savings to be made with the automation. The recruiting is actually very, very expensive. One of the things that people also look at recruiting and say, how do I differentiate myself from us to other not-for-profits? And flexibility, when we ask the question, flexibility is still seen as one of the key differentiators out there. The challenge with that is everyone is saying that. Okay? And if everyone's saying flexibility is a key differentiator, and that's what we're offering, and everyone's offering that, it suddenly doesn't become such a key differentiator anymore. It's what the market expects. So the challenge in recruiting people, and we're saying that, okay, our flexibility is a key differentiator. We've got to look at some alternatives out there, because the people don't seem to be coming back. Right? This shortage of people has got is something that is going to be continuing into the future. So governance. We asked what the biggest risk to the organisation was, and that's not surprising, linked to what we talked about a second ago, employee resourcing. Employee resourcing is a huge challenge. But what's with reputation? That's also linked to something that Matt and Darren are going to be talking about later on, is that the cybersecurity. What people are seeing, we see that further down, so high up, 11%. That's a real hot topic just now. People seeing cybersecurity as a real challenge, and the loss of reputation that can follow on from that is huge as well. There's also the impact in business. Once your name's in the press, it can be quite hard to try and recover that reputation, or very expensive anyway. Financial viability. Interesting, people still seeing that. That's the concerns about the rising costs. So if you've got to recruit more people, find more ways to incentivize people, bring them in, that's going to be expensive. And then you've got, combined with that, is looking at revenue as well, the challenges with revenue in the economic environment that we talked about earlier as well, the challenges with that. If we've got challenges with the economic environment, then you've got challenges with revenue, and then you can combine that with the increasing costs. You can see why it's many people are concerned about that. All right, technology. Now, before we talk about this slide, we talked about cybersecurity. We asked about who was concerned about a cyber attack on the organisation, and 88% of respondents said that they were concerned about that. The concerns concerned over personal data about members, customers, employees as well, and donors for those that receive donations as well. So it's seen as a real concern. Now, what people then look and say, okay, are you looking to change your organisation spend in technology? And 69% said that they plan to increase the spend. And I think that kind of follows this kind of common sense, but given up what we just talked about a second ago, and what the rest of this presentation is going to talk about, the automation, the cybersecurity, the replacing people they can't find. That technology spend, I think, is crucial to not only stay on par with the course, but to get ahead of the game. So I think I've covered most of these. We've got one, the third bullet point, but more than 93% measure customer satisfaction, which is really important, very important in the not-for-profit sector. Interesting one after that, more than 30% of organisations do not measure organisation culture. One of the things we look at differentiating can be the culture of the organisation. Difficult to measure, but still very important. If you don't have the right culture, you've got the wrong people coming in, you can really unravel your strategic plan very, very quickly. Everything else I think I've covered. So what I'll do now is I'll get Fiona up here and she's going to talk a bit about the technology.
Thank you, Aidan. So it's great to be here this morning to talk to everyone about automation and technology. It's one of my favourite topics, so I'm always happy to do that. It's also an important area for not-for-profit organisations to consider as part of their strategic plan. To kick things off, I have a polling question on ChatGPT. So how often do you use ChatGPT for personal or professional purposes? I'm hoping the majority of people, at least in this room, have heard of ChatGPT, and hopefully online as well. So quite interesting, the results, and I guess even interesting then to consider it in light of the findings of the strategic plan. It is still a fairly new technology, but I know there was quite a number of people that were looking at AI in their strategic plan, so ChatGPT is an example of that. So one of the questions in the not-for-profit survey was asking what sort of spend you're looking at over the next 3 years. 68% of the respondents said they were looking to increase organisational spend on technology, as Aidan touched on earlier. The most popular areas of spending were on system upgrades, integration and automation. We also asked survey respondents whether they thought their organisation would be impacted by AI and automation. The responses were split, 58% of the respondents saying yes and 42% saying no or not sure. With them results, I thought it would be useful then to talk about the difference between AI and automation, because it's not always that clear. Automation, which includes RPA or robotic process automation, is a task-driven automation. When you design an automated process, you clearly define the steps to be performed, when they should be performed, and what outputs you want to receive. Okay? Whereas AI is more complicated. AI can learn and mimic human behaviour. It tells you what it thinks you want to know. Algorithms and machine learning are a subset of AI that most people are familiar with. So think of Google Maps suggesting your frequent destinations and telling you how long it will take to get there. Or Microsoft Teams, for those that use Microsoft Teams, and I would assume other similar types of messaging systems, where they prompt you with a response to a chat. From the poll, we can see, hopefully it was, at least some people were aware of it. So ChatGPT is the new one that's come to town. Today, I will be focusing on automation primarily, and how it can be used within your organisation. One of the questions which Aidan touched on earlier was what you're looking, or how you're going to look to cover staffing gaps. 27% of the respondents of the survey said that they were looking to use automation or process improvement. I'm hoping by the end of this talk, I have convinced a few more of you that automation or process improvement might be the way to go to help cover some of the issues that Aidan was alluding to. One of the benefits of using automation is that it provides your organisation with a continuous resource. A bot or a digital employee does not need to take leave. It works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Once it's built, it needs minimal amount of maintenance required to keep it working and going. Digital employees can work alongside your existing staff members, taking on the manual repetitive tasks, freeing up your staff to focus on more of your organisation's mission and strategic priorities. So this is an example. So I have 3 examples to go through and to highlight where automation will come in or a digital employee will come in. So in this first example, imagine someone in your organisation needs to log into your system every week and download a particular report and then email it out to certain staff members, okay? If that staff member that's responsible for that is sick or on leave, potentially won't happen. They also need to remember to do it every week and at the same time every week so people can be ready for it. With automation, the yellow shows the digital employee. So you can effectively have a digital employee do the entire task for you. So it will be able to log into your system, download the reports that you need, and send it out to your staff or whoever it needs that report at the same time, at the same day for the rest of the year, for eternity until you turn it off, effectively. No sick days. It never forgets. It knows exactly when that needs to happen. And that's an example of very simple automation and what it can look like. A more complicated example, or slightly more complicated, and I guess I'm hoping that you can think about this in light of your organisation and what you would do. So whether it's a new member, a new donor, new employee, new supplier, however it works, this sort of concept. So you receive an inquiry for a new member. You will then fill in the form with the member's details. You might print a form, depending on whether you're paperless or not. You will then give the form to the membership team. The membership team will need to enter the information into the database, and then they need to notify finance that a new membership fee invoice needs to be created, for example. So what can automation do to solve this, or how can it help? Again, everything in yellow is what the digital employee would be able to do. So they obviously couple it. Let's assume in this example, they can't receive the inquiry for a new member because it's a phone call, okay? The person on the phone would still take down all the details into a form. The digital employee would then get them details from that form. They would be able to enter that new record into the database. They would notify the membership team that there's been a new member added and to review and approve that membership. The membership team would approve that request, so it would be handed off back to the staff member responsible for that. And then the digital employee would also notify finance that a invoice needs to be created. You could take it a step further and actually have the digital employee potentially create that invoice and even send it out to your member as well. It just depends on how far you want to take it, really. And the final example is, and so I've said this as an auditor, but even if you're not audited, so if you do monthly accounts, or you need to do a monthly board report, things like that, that happens every month or, yearly. So you get a request from an auditor, which is not always appreciated, because you're normally quite busy. I don't know why. So then staff members need to go into your system and download a multitude of reports, potentially even from multiple different systems. They need to compile it, potentially into one PDF or into one email, etc. And then they need to email it to the auditor. Again, the yellow shows the digital employee. So effectively, you would still get a request from the auditor. The digital employee would then pick up that request. They would go into the system. They would download all the reports, compile it into a PDF, and then either send it back to you to review or send it on to the auditor, depending on how comfortable you were with it. Hopefully that just gives you some ideas or some taste of what a digital employee could do and how they could potentially assist with some of your staffing gap issues. When you're considering automation, some things that you need to consider is to think about how all the businesses, all the areas in your business interact with each other. Processes can become, and I'm assuming some of you will know this, can become quite slow and inefficient whenever you have multiple different departments or areas responsible for different parts of the process. Automation can assist with that and help move things along, which can lead to efficiency gains because it stops waiting on certain people to do things. It can sort of just overtake if you have programmed it that way. So a readiness check whenever you're starting to think about automation. So data is, I don't like to say the king, but I can say the queen, but it is the most important thing, really. So is your data clean? Is it well maintained? How many sources of truth do you have? Is it one system or is it 5 systems that have a bit of data for a member or a donor? A digital employee relies on data. If it's not there, the digital employee can do nothing. Okay, so it does need some assistance. It can't do everything on its own. How suitable are your current processes for automation? If they're not suitable, are you open to changing them? And generally, you'll see that change happen as you go through the automation process. And so are you ready for that to happen? And then how much knowledge is actually retained by staff first being documented in the organisation, which also then comes back to data. So is it that you know a particular donor's email or member's email because it happens to be sitting in your Outlook and you're the only one that actually has that member's email? Or is it all in the same system and everyone knows how to find it and access it, etc.? And then change management is also important. It's quite a significant change bringing in a digital employee versus a human employee. So something to also consider. So communication along the way is quite critical. Okay, and that's it for me. So I will hand over to Todd now, who's going to talk about emerging risks.
Morning, everybody. So I get the fun thing to actually then contemplate where this is all going to go and try and cast the net out and think about how we sort of deal with some of these things, bringing automation into it, dealing with the employee issues and contemplating how the industry can work together to be able to counterbalance them, because it is an unusual industry where you're actually willing to share a bit more than in corporates in for-profit, and you're willing to work together. So that provides an opportunity to be able to do things a little bit differently because you're willing to share more. So where that goes to is some of the things that are in the report, which sort of gives that consistency. So a lot of it is around employee issues. It's also around managing resources. It's also around financial stability and trying to get costs down, because that's the reality. Is what you want to be doing is producing your outcome rather than actually spending money on costs, even if the auditors are extremely valuable in that right, Aidan. That led to us looking at it and saying, okay, what are the things that can add value here to focus expenditure and skills in the right sort of area to bring value back to the discussion. And if you look at all of those things, there's risk, there's a willingness to look at partnerships, there's a short-term issues that are there, there's the sustainability, and everything comes back to resourcing and how that all fits together. Having the right resources to do the right tasks to be able to allow execution to be the focus. That leads us to sort of the triangle that I work off, particularly not for profits. There's a little bit more complexity because in some other businesses, but there's finance and funding, which is something that has to be done, but is not necessarily the focus. There's people, which is all about everything. So people is consistent across all of the issues. And then there's delivery. And all of that adds a lot of complexity, but can be simplified along the way if everything is working together. So they're just the simple touch points that we look at and say, how do you manage each of those sort of portions of the triangle to make sure that you get the best outcome of each of those and try and drag it all together. So one of the things that we've been looking at and we're developing along with a couple of clients is looking at, first of all, for the group A. So this is sort of the 50K to 3 million turnover, which are obviously going to have a new regime on reporting coming forward where audit is not required. Hopefully, a lot of these entities are trying to grow. Some of them aren't, but some of them will tip over the $3 million. So you've got responsibilities as management to a board. You've got formal accounts, but no audit. You've also got an accounting process that needs to sit in there, and you've got the opportunity of automation to be able to streamline a lot of this. If in a simplified business at below $3 million, automation can take care of a lot of those sort of basic things to be able to simplify it. The other good thing about automation is everything's recorded. So it's transparent. It's like being on the blockchain the whole time. Everything is recorded. So if something goes wrong, you can see what it is and you can know how to fix it. It's a lot easier to also get employees to review and talk about things rather than having to do. So that streamlines your corporate structure and can reduce all of those sort of things if you can't find enough people to be able to do things, or you can focus people into delivery. So the opportunity, I think, for these guys pushing the next 5 years out is sharing resources, whether that be with a larger entity or whether that be with a number of smaller entities, to be able to say, okay, we don't necessarily need a full-time accountant, and we can't find one, but we need somebody to do our reporting and help us with our reporting and our strategy, and also make sure our numbers work. And that might be something that you can share with a larger entity who has capacity in their group. It also brings a little bit more independence and also brings that more sort of capacity in there and partnerships. I know that there's some difficulties there because there's also getting across the trust issue and willingness to be open. If you look at it, it's been successful in a few clubs where a few clubs have worked together and worked out they look over the top. I know in the NRL has submitted a number of times to say, why don't we have a consolidated marketing scenario where you can see how accessing $1 million person who does marketing rather than having 10 people who get paid $100,000, you might get a different return. And the costs are largely the same. So it's just thinking about that differently. And this is an out there sort of thought, and there's change in it. So it's confronting, but it's something that I think logically could be worked through. If you look at the larger entities, similar sort of structure, but probably here. So the board in the 3 million and below is probably the major parties who actually are producing and are working in the business and doing all of those things, or are start of the not-for-profit. Here the board is probably a little bit more a mix, where there are people in the business and there is also major donors, other sort of parties, because you're looking at these entities, some of these entities turn over $100 million, they're large businesses. So their requirements to make sure everything's being done is different. So then you have financial accounts, you have an audit requirement, so that's different. But then you still have an accounting process and automation. So in those businesses, the automation opportunity is probably larger because you have more volume of transactions. And it's just about thinking about that, and whether the shared resources is, if you've had to build all of that because you're a large organisation, is whether there's capacity to be able to support a smaller organisation with sharing those resources. Because accounting teams, I'm going to say this anyway, do get bored. It's nice to have different things that they're thinking about, and the people working in not-for-profits are there because they generally, this is the other thing they want to do, they want to make a contribution back. They're not there because this is their absolute, like that's part of their desire to be in it. Because there are obviously, and there's a lot of accounting roles available at the moment, so they can go and there's plenty of roles out there. But if they want to be in not-for-profits, they want to maximise the help. So if you've got really skilled people in there and they can actually be shared and provide more capacity down to other entities, how that's done, let's put that out there. But that's an opportunity there, and it may reduce your costs. So that's one of the things where the larger entities to be able to think about how they can assist the industry more, and how they can then provide their way through and share those sort of skills, abilities, whatever else to add value. So they're just a couple of the things we thought that came out of this around the issues facing the industry. And to be honest, they're facing pretty much everybody. Resourcing is something that we're seeing across all of our clients. It's just something that efficiency seems to have gone away, even though our friends at Meta seem to think that this is the year of efficiency. It hasn't really flowed through yet, although Fiona tells me ChatGPT should be able to do all of their jobs in the next 10 years. So that's where we're at. That's an out there idea, but it's something that we just think is an option for a number of parties going forward and a number of not-for-profits, because it all comes back to the fact the way we see you guys interact and the willingness to actually do things that you don't see in the for-profit sphere. Now, other issues that were emerging, and we've got the two rock stars sitting over here, we'll be on in a minute. The other things that everybody needs to be thinking about that we're seeing from my risk cap, so you don't need to read the bottom one, don't worry about them, I'll tell you about that in a minute, is things like wage underpayment. We're seeing everybody getting caught with it at the moment, and consistency going forward. So there will probably need to be if you've got a large workforce, you're probably going to need to have annual reviews to make sure that your board are comfortable that there isn't any underpayment, whatever else. I suspect there'll be a subscription service around that. It'll also help with your automation, because that'll be data driven, so it'll have a lot of background done on all of those. Basically, the way it's done is each award is done as a data sort of set, and they can check against each of your data sets and done that way. So that's the way those guys work. That is going to be an emerging issue for the next 5 to 10 years, because there's people who've just ignored it, and it's just going to keep catching people. You see listed top 10 companies having to come out and go, oh, we missed paying these guys $16, $20 million. And that's happened about 10 times this year. That's aside from the ones that you don't hear about, and the ones that aren't disclosed. And you also, if you're doing transactions or mergers at the moment, you can't actually get insurance until you've gone through that sort of process as well. So it is sitting underneath as a risk issue. So that's pretty much that from me. I'll hand over to the two rock stars.
Good morning, everyone. I'm not sure rock star, so I won't sing. Come on. My name's Fehon. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks Todd and HLB Mayor Judd for the invitation, and CBA as well, to be here with you today with the not-for-profit sector. I'll hand over to Darren shortly, who will run through some slides that he's got. Obviously, cyber is a critical risk and is sitting high on board agendas and organisation agendas, and the surveys reflecting that. I think from my perspective, when I look at cyber and the attacks, it probably comes up a level to the security of an organisation. And the security goes from your systems, but also your human capital and those that are within your organisation or who have access to your organisation. One of the real shifts that we're seeing, and coincidentally, seeing the Defence Strategic Review come out this week, and what our Defence Force is embarking upon, is really the geopolitical risks that are emerging, and those risks and how they're impacting supply chain, but then also operations. And what Darren and I do a lot of is actually working through the operational risks when there's a cyber attack. And cyber is just not the systems, but it is your operations as well. And that's often what's not thought of in the first instance. One of the things that we really focus on is why are you being attacked? And Darren will talk to your data and whatnot. And we know that there's personal identifiable information and other factors, but why really is someone after your data and what are they going to do with that data? So that's a real emerging issue, I suppose. But and Darren will touch a bit on this, and I can talk later when we're on the panel. That the insider risk should not be forgotten, and I think this is one of the bigger issues that government is now working towards. If we go back, to late 2021, and we heard of AUKUS being announced, and then we go through to the conflict in Iraq. That's showing age. The conflict in Ukraine. What we saw very quickly was, defence, US, and also Australian government identifying that there needed to be a lift in our security posture. Now, cyber is one that's critical, but then again, it's also those within an organisation. Not trying to spook anyone, but any of the fraud matters that I've been involved in not-for-profit or otherwise, often it was just a lack of due diligence into the individual or the external organisation that you were receiving or paying funds to. So it really got down to understanding who you're doing business with. And that, the old KYC, which has been around for a long time and soon to be probably inflicted upon accountants and lawyers and all the rest of us, more importantly, the real estate agents, I think. But I think it's really, the message I have is really understanding who you are doing business with. And that's probably the cyber element. Darren and I have been doing it now for 25 years together. And responding to incidents, whilst they weren't called cyber incidents at the time, but responding to technology incidents, they've been around for a long time. People, accessing systems, but we've really seen that evolve through the various methods. But I'll hand over to Darren, who will cover cyber specific. But I just want an intro. The broader security issues that you should be concerned with also relate to your people and systems and security. What we will see as government now embarks with further legislation around what they're requiring government agencies to do will then move into what they expect from their prime contractors, which ultimately I think those standards will then flow through the rest of the business community.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody. Look, the survey had some great results, and I sort of took a screenshot, like I think I saw a few other people do it. What are the biggest risks to your organisation? And I've actually got it there about over 50% is cyber. So certainly one of those interesting ones. And you look through loss of reputation, equal first. Obviously, that's the thing that we are worried about if we were to suffer an event. Financial viability. I actually had a number of clients who have been forced to pay a ransom because the only other option they had was insolvency. So certainly something to think about there. Cybersecurity incidents out on its own, business interruption, that's the key. And if you're getting insurance in this space, that's what you're insuring for, that interruption. And we even had changes in legislation and regulation. And I know many of us have probably had a look at what the Privacy Act is suggesting will happen this year and the changes that will go through there. And I love the way our government deals with issues like this. It's usually a big stick, and the big stick was, well, let's go and change the penalties, and maybe we'll start with a minimum $50 million penalty if you are a victim. Doesn't sound great, but that's sort of where we landed. I'm going to run through the slides fairly quickly, as I said, and there's get Matt to have some views towards the end as well. It's been an interesting start to the year for us. We've spent a lot of time talking to boards and executives in relation to their risks, and one of those key risks they keep bringing up is the technology and cyber risks. It's not new. One of the early slides, I think, from the survey indicated that there was likely to be a substantial amount of spend in technology. I wonder how much of that's going to go towards security. I had a look at the breakdown. It was more about operational build as opposed to securing those assets. Anyone only has to look at what happened in the last half of 2022. And all of a sudden, I know a lot of not-for-profits I deal with were asking me the questions, well, if Optus and Medibank and all these other large brands can't get it right, what hope have we got of being able to meet a minimum to safeguard our information and our people's records? One thing that we've seen over the last 5 years is most of these attacks aren't sophisticated, even though maybe in the press you'll like to have a press statement that says we're a victim of a highly sophisticated cyber attack. You don't say that anymore, by the way. The minister doesn't like you saying that, you'll get called out. The fact is that most of the time it's the basics, it's the simple things that people aren't doing. And I don't think I've done one incident in the last 3 years, and that puts me over 300 incidents. We get to do a lot of breaches for mainly insurers and others. There's only been 2 or 3 that weren't, the root cause wasn't something basic that could be addressed and could be fixed and didn't cost a lot of money to do it. The ones that we thought were really good were ones that we probably don't have to worry about but do happen. State-sponsored attacks. I know the government is talking about that as a risk at the moment. Generally, you won't know that the state's in your computer systems and they won't be committing some ransomware and they'll be nice and quiet, so you don't have to worry about that too much. The threats that we've got out there. So look, the key ones at the moment is if anyone's involved in any way in critical infrastructure and the supply chains connected to them, you're going to be drawn into needing to be better at your security because of who you're dealing with. There's a real focus on protecting those critical infrastructure assets at the moment. We've seen a couple of incidents last year where power stations and the like were impacted by cyber events. And all of a sudden, I think what we saw is the government sort of taking a step back and saying, oh, hang on, we almost lost half the state's power because of a simple ransomware attack. Now, what are we doing to protect those assets? And what if that was deliberately targeted? Imagine the damage that could be done. So there's a real focus on those areas, and critical infrastructure is far more than the energy and the water sectors now. I think it's been redefined to 11 different sectors. So at some point, you're definitely likely connected to one of them. Attacks are increasing in size. I'll talk a little bit to that later on. Certainly, we are still seeing big entities getting attacked and falling victim. You know, you look at I think Latitude has now holds the record for the largest. I'm not sure how long they'll hold that one for. Before that, Optus was sort of sitting there to take the record. So we are seeing bigger and bigger, but when we're measuring the attacks, we seem to measure it based on the amount of loss of data and the impact to individuals. And that's an interesting way of measuring what's a big attack. How many individuals did you harm? It's not what was the cost of the attack or how much interruption was there or those things, but generally we want to know how many people we hurt. And then that's what you sort of see in the press as well. Go straight to why we're so worried about our brand and our reputation. You think about that is if the press is taking us as the victim of a cyber attack, and I guess you need to look at Optus and Medibank, they were the victims of the cyber attack, and they were the ones that have got, I think Optus's last suggestion was $170 million in costs already that they've had to sort of pay out because of this attack. Yet they're not perceived as the victims in the press. They're perceived quite often as the person, the entity, the organisation that's responsible for harming people. Every year for the last 2 years, and we're going to continue doing this, we've asked the country, Australia, why ransomware seems to be such a hot topic in this year here. And I, in 21 and 22, we did more ransomwares than we did anything else by way of incident response. We went out and we've done some surveys and tried to understand that why in Australia are being so targeted. Interestingly enough, it was 70% of the survey, and we tried to pick a really broad range of survey. We did it with YouGov, so it was from small, medium, large and enterprise. We tried to get a good balance to get that view. Of our survey population, about 70% over the last 5 years had been a victim of a ransomware attack, so it's common. Then when we had a look at that, we asked the harder questions, are you paying and why you're paying, and 80% of those paid, and the average payment of a ransom in Australia was $1 million. What that means for us is that as a country, we are absolutely top target for cyber attacks, because the likelihood of, if you're successful in your attack, there's a likelihood that you'll get some money at the back of that and you'll get paid. And as a result, we saw over the last 2 years this massive increase in the number of attacks directed at Australians. Now, it doesn't mean they're naturally targeting you, but as a country, we certainly were being targeted because of the amount of money that we were sending back out. I'm often asked, well, why are we so bad at paying? It sort of comes back a little bit to our culture as a country. As a country, we want to do the right thing. We are about helping our clients, our people, our customers. We've got this attitude of sort of being forward. Most of the board sessions that I sat through, where we were doing a not to pay, to pay or not to pay discussion in real life, not a tabletop exercise, it was information about who our threat actor was. So, Russian group. Of the last 110 times we've seen them extorting someone. We have this honesty piece. How honest are our attackers? And I've seen instances where the stats say that they're 100% honest bad guys, in that if you pay them, they won't leak your data to the world. They will come through with keys to your information. They won't re-extort you. They will do all these things. And I've even seen it, they'll give you a report as to how they got into your system and help you with the cybersecurity. So that's what you're dealing with. And if you do all of those things, you won't cause further harm, because you won't have this big disclosure of private information about your people and your customers to the world. And a lot of that is, well, we're minimizing further harm. We've already done harm with the event. You're just asking me to pay something to minimize it further. And I think the Medibank hackers did it best in their communications when they were out there trying to get their payment. And their last comms piece out to the world was, look, we've looked at the records. We've got 10 million records here. We just want $1 per record. 10 million is the ransom. So if you can pay us $1, if you don't think all of your customers are worth $1, then don't pay. But if they are worth $1, then pay that, and we won't make any further disclosures, and there'll be no further harm. And of course, the government was quite strong in its view, is that you don't pay, and they didn't. Some common cyber risks, and these are the things that a lot of us trying to look at. Legacy IT in not-for-profits is something I see often. A lot of not-for-profits have got older systems that they haven't had a chance or the budgets to fix. They've still got some older technology and older operating systems. They're trying to work through other things. Often the mission and the cause comes first, and that's a normal thing. Legacy IT is one of the common things that causes a cyber breach, because you have older systems that you can't fix and are therefore just vulnerable. So we'd like to see groups pulling those requests to update and fix technology to the top. Your people are definitely targeted, and cyber is one of those things that is still quite difficult to train on. Education and awareness needs to be quite key. What we are seeing though is the attacks are changing quite regularly, and that training does need to be consistent. Otherwise, someone will fall for something. And one of those areas that we are now seeing is, we've been probably pushing for years, multi-factor authentication. Get your MFA on, secure those accounts. It's a silver bullet. You'll be okay. Well, right now we've got targeted attacks to defeat multi-factor, and we quite commonly now see email accounts are being compromised, even with things like MFA in there, because we're not training people to look for different types of issues and scams. And as I said, the regulatory landscape is changing, so there's a range of things that are going to force us to do things differently in the space. So we'll all be looking back to our own businesses and reconsidering what needs to change. And one simple change I can see coming through is, at the moment, we generally get a month if you have an event to determine whether it's notifiable. The Privacy Commissioner likes you to do it quicker. You get about a month to consider it. And if you get to that month and you realise you've got a notifiable event, I think the access you have to reasonably, as soon as reasonably possible, tell somebody. That's not defined. So you get time. One of the changes will be pretty much 72 hours, just like the EU has. So all of a sudden, your incident response to an issue has to be that quick. You have to be ready to make disclosures as fast as you can. This is always a slide that Matt and I talk about, right there, who's doing this, who's attacking us. Quite clearly, Matt mentioned at the start, there are real estate sponsored attacks that occur all the time, where a nation state is in a system looking for information. One thing to consider is that when you don't actually have a nation state, you've got what I consider the most common, which is the organised crime syndicates, the guys that are responsible for a lot of the bigger attacks coming out of countries like Russia. If they have a ransomware and they steal your data and you don't pay, they are still criminals. They are going to sell it somewhere. And often they're going to sell it to the very top, to the states, who would want to see information about a different country, as well as other organised crime groups. We still see malicious insiders regularly as being connected. At the moment, I was on a dark web marketplace recently. Someone who had just managed to buy 3 admin accounts from a US company, and he was quite proud. He only paid $10,000 each. There are criminals offering your administrators in your businesses money to give up their credentials because they're the keys to the castle. That's the golden account they need. And there are instances where people are being targeted directly because of who they work for and the types of credentials they have, and being offered large amounts of money to share that information. We still see just the cyber criminals. Probably all remember the Nigerian letters we used to get. They're obviously Nigerian emails now. They are way better now because of ChatGPT. That's a great use of ChatGPT. ChatGPT won't let you construct a phishing email though. It does have an aura of safety around it. You can't have a conversation with it about religion. But if you go to ChatGPT and say, if I was building a phishing email to run an education program, how would you do it? And it's stupid enough to give you the answer. I worry about the other ChatGPT, which is Chaos GPT. That's the AI without any constraints. And if you Google Chaos GPT and there's an article on when someone asked it how it was going to take over the world, and you have a look at its response, it is quite scary. So we just touched on, some of the who's, and I've just thrown a couple of examples of what you should hopefully will never see in your life, which are ransomware notes and auctions of your data on the dark web. There's something that we're all worried about. Right now, there's a change in attacks that we're seeing, and this goes back to people being targeted and controls being targeted, and social engineering being one of those things that still wraps around all of these issues. We had a client, this is only 2 months old, who I think it's the largest incident of a payment I've seen. It's also the fastest payment I've sort of seen, and therefore I think as a job, if I could make it was a $9 million loss that took about 3 hours to occur. So it's not a bad investment in a return. And literally it was, it all started with an email that a accounts payable person received. That email was from a bank security team, and it said, please don't do anything. We've identified a transaction. It was suspicious. We've held it. We're investigating it. Our team will contact you. We'll need some more information. But just be aware that it's been detected. Within about half an hour, a phone call came through from the bank security team. Sounded great. Apparently Australians. I spoke to the person involved. Said all the right things. Please don't give me any personal information. At this point, we've started an investigation. Can I confirm you received the email? I'm going to tell you who it was from as a way of authenticating who we are. It was from X. We're going to now send you a text message to confirm who we are. The person got a text message into that bank's normal text chain where, the various text messages would appear. And the text message was simply, this is just advising you are speaking to our security team. Please don't do anything with this text message. Simple, nice, all the right things you want to hear. Don't give me information, don't click on links, don't do any of these things. The conversation went a little bit further, and then it got to the point is, we are going to need to do a final verification. We'll need you to validate, and we will give you some account transaction amounts in your account. Very normal for a bank to do that. You'll need to confirm them. Firstly, we need to validate you. Finally, please don't give us any personal information. We already have that. You just give us the random number on your token. Everything in that person's head was working right. We're doing the right things. We're going through security checks. I'm not being asked for personal information. It's just a random 6-digit number. No problem. Immediately, the person on the other end said, can you confirm that these 2 amounts are within your transaction history? Fantastic. Okay, we can now talk to each other. This is what's happening. And got a rubbish story about $5 million being tried to be transferred out. It's being held. It's in another bank. The bank can get it back. We're going to need to do a bit of work. That person is obviously so relieved that they've stopped this transaction, having the right conversation. We'll need to come back to you a few times and we'll get this settled, please don't worry. The next 3 conversations, just validate that number again for me. Great. So I gave up the token ID 3 more times. There was 3 transactions of $3 million each. The next day it came out because the person actually went in there to check the account. Well, hang on, that's more than $5 million. That's $9 million. But they did say it'd take 24 hours for the money to come back in. By midday, started to get more suspicious and rang up the bank again just to say, look, how's it going? And of course, it all unwound at that point. They got half the money back. That's what we need to teach our people about. And they're the types of systems that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Board and execs, I've got some questions here. These slides are available. What should you be asking your people? What should you be asking your teams? What are the things you need to worry about? Ultimately, when I'm asked what are the top, few things you should do, simple. It's the basics. Get your IT hygiene right. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre gives out great advice around the essential 8 controls. Implement them and focus on them, and put security into that equation of where you're going to spend some of that IT money. Balance it with automation, of course, and robotics. You've got to have a bit there, but the rest of it can go into security.
We've got a couple of minutes, and I think it's worthwhile having the guys up to ask some questions. Now, Tanya, I can see that there's one sitting in chat and one sitting in Q&A.
One in chat is from Fiona. What are some of the apps platforms on the market that could do the automation?
Sure. So currently we're using a combination of Microsoft. So they have a Power Platform which allows you to build out automations with RPA, and also the UiPath to be able to get into legacy systems.
I'll start with the A's. And with the removal requirements for audit below 3 million, now do you think not-for-profits in this category can maintain external review without committing to the cost and time of an audit? How do they do it?
Yeah, there you go. Still a review requirement if your revenue is over 500,000. The ACNC, I've said this many times, have got a really good website. It's information they compare cost benefits audit versus review. And while a review is a bit cheaper, the level of assurance is far, far less than it is an audit. An audit, in layman's terms, they'll quote me here, we're not being recorded, are we? In layman's terms, an audit is pretty much saying thumbs up in all material respects. A review is saying, you know what, nothing indicates to us that it's not thumbs up. It's much less in scope in an audit. So the audit still has the benefits there. It's really what the board's concern is with this, what their appetite is with this. An auditor can do an audit of certain things. I can still do an audit. The review's not that much cheaper. It's a bit cheaper, but sometimes the cost benefit isn't quite there.
Back to cyber. You guys have done a few podcasts around people getting away with or trying to get away with things and not. I'm actually listening to one about the Lazarus project at the moment, which is our wonderful friends from North Korea, because apparently that's the way they fund their whole economy is via cyber actions. So it's obviously the Russians and North Korea are obviously active parties out there. So, but for not-for-profits, they're probably not as attractive because they don't antagonise those sort of parties, I would have thought.
Yeah, no, it's something that we're really focused on. If I say really focused, whilst it's all around security in the first instance, why are people wanting your data? And first and foremost, yes, there's the entrepreneurs, if we want to call them that, but the cyber organised crime syndicates. If you look at the crime stats over the last probably 20 years, offences against the individual, so violent offences, have significantly dropped. And particularly through COVID, we've seen break and enters and other things of that kind drop. But what's certainly gone up has been the cyber attacks and certainly ransomware attacks and other online scams. So really going up, it's the faceless criminals these days that we're seeing. Now, who are they and who's behind that? You mentioned North Korea and Russia, China, other states, all these states. Why do they want the data? Is it for for profit? Yes, certainly it is with some of the organised criminal gangs. I think one leading police officer who was the head of one of the fraud squads said to me a couple of years ago, Matt, these frauds should be dealt with civilly. And I said to that individual at the time, we were on the phone, I said, well, if you're going to decriminalise fraud, I'm going into the business of fraud. Because I'm happy to settle everyone I get caught on. I think when we get to, you know, the difficulty with cyber is that faceless aspect. So some of it is for profit, but what's actually behind them? There is, let's just say, a hypothetical where you pay the ransom, but the data actually is already then unsold anyway. Now, you know, no one's really going to know that unless there's other information that comes to light, and that's something that we do focus on. But sometimes it's actually your data, and certainly in the US with a range of hacks that occurred probably 4 or 5 years ago, that data then being on-sold to data accumulators. Now, there's a number of charges that have been preferred in the US where people have been transferring data back to some of these nation states, and they've been accumulating that data to identify people who have vulnerabilities or may have, you know, extensive wealth, and then they're targeted by some of these state actors, but by their let's call it their you know, their security agents, who then approach these people and try and compromise them into doing something they ordinarily wouldn't do. So data is valuable, we know that. Accumulating that to get insights is even more valuable, whether it's AI or analytics or what data can then train someone to understand. But to be able to compromise someone, that's when we're starting to move across to the world of interference and influence. And we're seeing a lot more now around legislation akin to, or legislation particularly in relation to private interference and whatnot. So headline, it's no doubt for profit and it's profitable. If someone can get away with it, obviously those amounts, if you're talking 9 mil. But the other side is people want the data.
And there's alignment with some of these nation states between the criminals, because the other thing you need to do is not only getting the data, but if you're actually getting cash or whatever else, then you got to wash it.
Yeah.
And so you need to do that with some sort of relationship, because nation states, although they're good, they're not as sophisticated at washing money as some of the criminal aspects are. So it's interesting how they all interact as this sort of grand plan.
It is, and then Darren can talk to this. The forms in which they're paid. You know, is it bank transfer or is it via you know, the blockchain or via crypto? Asking someone to pay a ransom by way of crypto. The only, I won't say the beauty, but the ability that you know, the blockchain provides, and we do a lot of tracing. And one thing that Darren can provide someone some comfort. Yes, you got scammed. Yes, you paid the ransom. Yes, it went to a wallet where there's a lot of other ransoms going to. So you got legitimately scammed, which isn't any comfort really, other than to say, well, we got done by someone who's
Sophisticated.
Yeah, sophisticated.
Anybody in-house like to ask any questions?
Rob Samuel from Castillion. I'm just interested on the automation side of things around engaging your subject matter experts, and to some extent in cybersecurity as well. These things are often traditionally seen as IT things, and the IT people actually don't know much about good automation or good cybersecurity, because there are other aspects beyond the technology.
Fiona loves the process, man. She loves making us all do it. How many videos do we have?
I need to answer that. So I'm not IT. I'm an accountant by background. I think it's really important that you have it. I don't necessarily see the way automation happens now, that you need to have it sitting in your IT department. To me, it sits more outside your IT department, and you'll have experts that probably your IT department won't even have. So being an automation developer, so we brought that one in when we needed it. But otherwise, it's very important to be engaging with people within your business that know, and learning that process, and then developing what that's going to look like from an automation perspective.
Thank you. There's so many questions once you go down the rabbit warren of cyber, but I guess the really pertinent one to a lot of organisations and ourselves as well is are the cyber insurances keeping up with the speed of the rapidly fast moving pace as what's happening out in the world?
So that question is, you know, are the insurance policies and the providers of those policies keeping up with the, you know, the real things that are out there? Look, yes, in a way they are. I'm on the panel of probably a dozen different insurers, so we get to see the large policies, you know, AIGs and Chubbs and the likes, all the way through to the smaller ones, and even the specific cyber-only policies that are now emerging. Unfortunately, they are keeping up in some ways, which doesn't help us. For instance, in the past, a ransom payment was generally just covered. So if you had to pay a ransom, the insurer would just pay you back as part of the coverage. We're now seeing the reality of a payment, especially in countries like Australia, where we're going to pay, the insurers are going, oh, gee, that's not good. So we'll maybe do a co-payment system, or they won't cover it at all. I've also seen changes to policies now, where if it's a cyber war, like a cyber attack, nation state attack, the coverage isn't going to work either. So if we get caught up in a cyber war, none of our policies are worth much. They do, though, keep up with the realities of what happens in an attack, which is good. So you would generally get access to experts. That's what you're paying for. You'll get access to all of your legal, your technology, your forensic, incident responders, and technologists to help you rebuild. So they know that that's what you're going to need, including comms and legal. You know, that's a mandatory thing, and the coverage on your interruption is very good. What I would say, though, is that like any insurance piece, you need to be from day one managing the relationship with your insurer and keeping them up to date on costs if you don't want to have a fight at the end, because I've seen a couple of instances and worked on some jobs where we've blown up to $20 million policies very quickly. And then you're at that point where, you know, you're paying a lot, so you got to make sure you get it right.
I think we're going to draw a line there. I think we could talk all day on some of these things, and I could ask them some other questions about some more nefarious characters that we dealt with. Kim has a couple of things to talk about.
Thank you so much to our guest speakers and to our partners today who presented. There are so many questions. I've got, you know, a list full of them, but I think that the topics that were covered were so interesting that we're going to have lots of questions. So what I will do is I'll take those questions offline and I'll ask our experts to, you know, come back to you on those. So if you've got any questions, please just email me through. So where are you in your strategic planning process? For those of you that indicated in the survey that you'll be reviewing your strategic plan in 2023, I'll be making contact with you to see how HLB Man Judd can assist you. In terms of our guest speakers and the topics, our guest speakers are very happy to be in contact and to answer any questions that you have. If you can, one of two ways, obviously you know that you will be receiving the recordings, the slides and the presentation in the next week or so. Their contact details are up there, so you can contact them direct, or please, you know, contact me and then I'll put you through to them. And then we've got some giveaways. Now I'm going to, it's hard to do the hybrid model with a giveaway, but I've got 5 books, and these books are referenced greatly by Todd Gammel in terms of this particular author. And so this is Fred Hilmer and What's Wrong with Boards. This is Rethinking Corporate Governance. Now I'd like to give 5 of these away. So I think what I will do is I will kind of pull people's names out of a hat from people that are in person and online, and I'll make sure that I get these to you within the next week or so. And then our next NFP briefing will be held at the end of July, and that will be on innovation and technology. But I do think that the conversation around cyber and automation needs to continue. So I think that we may look at, in terms of the ENFP boardroom program, delivering something again. So I just think that it's so much to grapple with when you're listening to the sound of the size of what's happening out there. And you know, I was sitting in my chair thinking, how do you ensure, how do you give comfort to your donors? Making phone calls to a vulnerable senior in terms of donations, you know, it's just, you know, I think they're the things that we need to start to relook at. So thank you all again for the people that attended in person and online, and we'll see you in July. Thank you so much.